Hello everyone, I'm Casper. I'm the founder of Testeroni, where we help our clients make sure that they deliver their software fully cooked instead of half-baked. And here on YouTube, we help aspiring QA engineers become test automation engineers one slice at a time. And today we are going to talk about a very interesting concept of a framework. You, I'm sure, have heard this thrown a lot in the past, and you may have wondered what exactly does a framework mean, because the more you hear about it, the more you start to wonder, is it always the same thing those people are talking about? And today in this video, we are going to explore this very question and try to kind of dissect this concept a little further, because I feel like the knowledge you may get from kind of textbook definitions may not really be up to the task of allowing you to fully understand that and to explore this world with the most comfort that this could actually provide to you. And so in order to tackle that, let's jump to our whiteboard. And so the big overarching topic of today's lesson is going to be a framework. So you, like I said, have probably heard about that quite a lot. You usually hear people throwing this phrase left and right, when in actuality it may mean different things for different people. And the deeper you get into the subject and the deeper you get into the actual work, the more you will see that people don't always mean the same thing when they talk about a framework, and it's not so easy. But in order to actually see the big picture and to understand that, I think we should start with the textbook definition. I don't think that it's particularly useful in your day-to-day work, but it is certainly useful in your exams, in your interviews, and stuff like that. So I think it will be good to start with that, and then we will try to dissect it and to see why it doesn't work in everyday practical applications. So let's start with this sort of textbook approach. And I won't take too much of your time here, because like I said, I don't think that is the crucial thing, but I think it is good to then have your knowledge structured in a more sensible way. And so bear with me, don't try to memorize everything that I'll try to talk to you about now, but just try and kind of get the overarching concept. And so let's start. So what is a framework in the textbook encyclopedic sense? What does a framework mean? So the main thing you should understand from this textbook approach about a framework is that a framework is a set of guidelines. And you may wonder, what kind of guidelines? What does that even mean? So the general definition of a framework is that it's a set of guidelines, conventions, and tools that provide a structured way to conduct your testing. So this is a set of guidelines. It also contains information about the structure, like of the test cases, of the tests themselves, the management of test data, the reporting, the logging, the actual execution of all the tests, or only a part of it, because it's not like you won't get caught by the framework police if you don't include everything. So it's not like it's the common law that you need to have all of these things, but all these things can be a part of a framework. When we say framework, by definition, we mean a set of all these guidelines, of all these descriptions of the testing process, of all the data management that comes with it, all the reporting, logging, and stuff like that. And to make this matter even more head-spinning, this does not only include automated testing, because this also includes manual tests. So yeah, I know this gets a little tricky, but like I said, don't get discouraged. The main thing to remember here is that a framework is a set of guidelines. And like we said, these guidelines may or may not, because you don't need to have all of them, refer to things like execution, the actual test cases, reporting, logging, structure, practices, and so on and so forth. So you can see that this is quite a large umbrella term, which doesn't really tell us how does it appear in nature. How can you see a framework? Okay, it's a set of guidelines, but all right, and even then it can be both manual and automated. Yes, it can. If we want to focus more on automation part of it, we have a subset of the testing framework, which is the automation framework. And so let's also talk about that for a second. So the automation framework. So this is a subset of the testing framework that focuses solely on automation. This one does not encompass the manual testing. So this is the part of the testing framework focusing solely on automation. And what does this do? And again, this is also a set of guidelines. This is a set of guidelines that focuses only on automation, but it's still a set of guidelines. So it does things like best practices, coding standards, the conventions of a given project, the tooling, which will be very interesting in a second, and the general everything that can be categorized as guidelines. And so this part is especially important and interesting because it does include the tooling, but it is not the tooling. So this may be a little head spinning, and it would be even more head spinning if we got more into this, because sometimes when people say about the automation framework, they instead mean things like the automation library or the like tools, the actual technology that goes within, and it may not be the whole automation framework. And so this is a discussion for another day because we are getting too semantic here. So let's not go there. Let's just stick to testing framework and automation framework. And so the automation framework is a subset of the testing framework that focuses solely on automation. It is, again, a set of guidelines. It is not that you need to have some specific points or else it's not an automation framework. It would still be an automation framework, so don't worry about that. You have all or some of them. It focuses on how the tests are going to be run, how the reporting is going to go, again, logging the whole pipeline of how this executes, and the test cases themselves, and how they are then passed to the tooling to go through the motions and actually execute. So all of this, but only regarding the automation, goes into the automation framework, which is a part of a larger thing which operates on the same premise, but focuses also on the manual side of things. And that one is called the testing framework. And so herein the problem starts, because first of all, some people use these terms interchangeably, and this wouldn't be so bad yet, because you could kind of infer whether they mean the automated tests or like the manual tests or like whatever. But the problem begins when you actually start working in a project and people start talking about different aspects of it, because then it may get a little confusing. And so let's see why that is. So like I said, it's all fine and dandy when we're talking about exams, interviews, and stuff like that, more theoretical approaches. But in your day-to-day work, when you're actually in a project or when they ask you something more practical in the interviews, you are going to hear different questions or sentences which may be which may cause a lot of confusion for you. And to see what I mean, let's just write down some things that you may actually hear when you're working. So things like, we have chosen framework X, Y, Z. Or on the other hand, you may hear that, maybe let's even divide that up. You can hear stuff like, your responsibility is going to be, or is to create a framework for our automation. So even here, we start to see some weird things, right? So we have chosen framework XYZ, and your responsibility is to create a framework for our automation. And you most likely associate framework with stuff like Selenium, Robot Framework, Cypress, Playwright, and rightfully so. Most people will talk about these things as simply a framework, and they are right in that. But it's not the whole picture. They may still mean something completely different and still be right in that and still be understood by other people from the industry. And so you need to be one of those people and to understand what they mean, that they don't always mean the same thing. So as you can see, we have chosen framework XYZ, like one of the things that we have talked about. Yeah, okay, this sounds sensible, but your responsibility is to create a framework for our automation. Does that mean you need to create something on the scale of a robot framework on your own? Does that mean that you need to create your own Selenium? Let's see in the in the latter part of this video First of all, let's just see this discrepancy that is created here. So either of these just say a framework, but they mean completely different things, and we will learn how to know which one's which in a second. But let's just give some more examples. So on the left hand side, we could hear stuff like, it's a really popular framework, while on the other side you can hear stuff like, we need to do some refactoring within framework. Again, are those people talking about the same thing? So is the person that's telling you it's a really popular framework, like during the interview or when they are giving you an intro to the project, when they are just like walking you around all the things that are going on, is the same thing meant when someone says we need to do some refactoring within the framework? Does that person mean you need to actually get into the code of Selenium, Robo, Cypress, Playwright, and actually do some changes there? Does that person mean that you actually need to get into the repo of like a technology that's been out there for years and years, that's like contributed to by hundreds, if not thousands of people, and you need to make changes to it on your own? Does that person really mean that? So let's just give one more example maybe. So for example, on the left hand side, you could have stuff like, which frameworks do you have experience working in? While on the other side, you could have a question like, how would you go about creating a framework? So again, does this person on the left hand side mean the same thing as the person on the right hand side? Is the question, which frameworks do you have experience working in, consider the same things as how would you go about creating a framework? Does the person on the right hand side expect you to tell them a whole game plan of how you would create something like Selenium from the ground up? So I think that the point is clear now, that there are in like most situations, two ways people can talk about this different things with the same wording. And so let's try and understand why that is. We know the definitions, we have talked about them before, right? So if we scroll up, we actually have all our things about the automation framework, about the testing framework. Yeah, it's all good, but these are very vague and abstract, right? They don't really help us here. Like, how does the fact that we know that an automation framework can consist of best practices, coding standards, conventions, and stuff like that, how does that help us in understanding what do people mean in either of these two like sides of the barricade? And to make things even more complex, how do we know when they mean one thing or the other? So like I said, the definitions are way too abstract and too vague here to actually help. And so here we come to the rescue. So I would say the one heuristic that you should use is that in the situations like that on the left-hand side, people mean the actual tech. With situations on the right-hand side, people mean the implementation of the testing within a given organization, corporation, project using the technology on the left-hand side. So this is the implementation of tests. And so on the left-hand side, we have things like the robot framework, Cypress, Selenium, Playwright, the actual tools that are out there in the market, which actually allow you to implement all the things from the automation framework textbook definition that we have talked about. But we are talking about the actual tech. So something you can learn before you even, and you should learn before you even join an organization and before you join a project. So this is the actual technology. So like the thing you understand as Selenium Robot Framework, the thing you can learn, read tutorials about, and watch videos about. And on the right-hand side, we have the implementation of the actual tests within the framework, our testing framework, this big thing that we have talked about in the beginning of the video, using the technology on the left-hand side. So this is something you can't really learn before you join a project. You can't really expect to have a way of getting into the code base before getting there. You can know the pipelines, you can't know the coding standards that are implemented, or the like linting and stuff like that, you can't really know that before you join a project. So when people talk about framework in the sense from the right hand side of this table, they mean the implementation of the tests using the technology from the left hand side. And so a good kind of mnemonic to remember that is that whenever people are talking about stuff like choosing or selecting, they ask about your experience, they mean the actual technology, the stuff you should learn before you get there, the stuff that is like higher level, that is the specific coding things that you can do and the tools you need to know in order to operate in a given tech stack that is not tied into the organization, that does not encompass anything within the organization standards yet. And whenever they talk about things like creating or refactoring or changing something within, they mean the implementation of the test. So they mean the ecosystem within the organization that is implemented using the actual technology from the left-hand side. And so they mean the things that you will learn as you go. So they mean the stuff that is specific to what a given testing framework within the organization is supposed to do. So all these logging conventions and stuff like that we talked about in the beginning. And very often they just mean the implementation of the test cases. So you can think about it like the left-hand side is a robot framework. The right-hand side is the test cases that actually go through the steps and execute something to validate whether it's a false or truth using robot framework. On the left-hand side, you can have like Cypress, and on the right-hand side, you can have the test cases implemented using Cypress. And on the left-hand side, you can have Playwright. On the right-hand side, you can have the regression tests, which are run automatically using that tool. So once again, the actual tech, the thing from the outside, like accessible from the outside that they can learn. On the left-hand side, the implementation of the test on the right-hand side. And now that we have this knowledge, let's go back to the sentences, the questions that we had before, and try to dissect them using that knowledge, and everything will be clear. All right, so now, armed with this knowledge, let's tackle these questions again. So we have chosen, keyword chosen, framework X. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that they have chosen something regarding the internals or something regarding these abstract ideas of a framework, what a framework might be, and these conventions and guidelines that we have talked about in the beginning. It's all cool and dandy to know that, but it doesn't really help you in everyday life when you actually need to talk about something with your coworkers and you need to actually have something done and you don't really know what they are talking about because you have only learned about testing frameworks from like ISTQB, exam preparation materials, and you can like recite the whole thing, but you don't really know what's happening. So here we are focusing on the practicalities. So we have chosen framework XYZ. That means they have chosen some kind of a tool that is probably one of the main frameworks that are out there in the market. On the right-hand side, we have your responsibility is to create a framework for automation. So create, keyword, they mean the implementation of the test. They don't want you to like reinvent the wheel and suddenly to become a full-time developer of a new tool that's going to like break the market. They don't expect you to create your own robot framework. They don't expect you to create a new Playwright or like to revolutionize the industry with the new Selenium. Also, a good rule of thumb is that if something sounds like too big of a task for a test automation engineer, like too grandiose, I'm not talking about too many test cases to automate. I'm talking about like creating a framework and you think like, oh my God, do they mean the like a whole framework, the whole code base of a new framework? If it sounds too big, it probably is. So yeah, if they say that your responsibility is to create a framework, you should know that they mean the implementation of the tests they already probably have in written form somewhere. Like you should hope they do. If you have that, if they have that, you just need to automate it using a framework that is agreed upon, or that you need to propose, like one of those from the left-hand side. So again, you are using the test cases they have to automate them, right-hand side, using the tool from the left-hand side, like Robo, Selenium, and stuff like that. Okay, let's go to the next one. It's a really popular framework. So that already means that it's something that's accessible from the outside. Nobody's talking about the test cases they have automated within as something that's popular. If something's popular, it means that it's accessible from the outside. It's in the industry standard. It's not project specific. And so that means it's the actual technology, like Robo framework, say. And on the right-hand side, we need to do some refactoring within the framework. So we need to do some refactoring. Again, it would probably sound to you as too big of a task for a QA department to refactor the code of a tool that's been out there for years. And it is. So what they mean by we need to do some refactoring is not we need to make Robo framework that hundreds of people have worked on and that has like conferences all around the world. We need to make it better because like we are way smarter than all those people. They don't mean that. They mean we need to make something within our tests, our internal tests, so that they like run faster, or they integrate better, they report better, they log better and stuff like that. And Robo framework actually does some of that stuff for you. And that's why people often refer to those things as testing frameworks or automation frameworks. You can very often hear people just call Selenium a testing framework, or Playwright the automation framework. And like I said, let's not get into the debate of what's a framework and what's a tool and what's a library. Let's just stick to the facts. People do use those terms interchangeably, and you will hear those things called this. And it doesn't make it easier that some of those tools also have a framework as their name. So like Robo is a Robo framework. And why? Because it does all the things that we have talked about in the beginning. It's an implementation of that abstract idea. So it does take care of logging for you, reporting. It can be wired up into the CI/CD pipelines and stuff like that. It can do all this stuff. So it is like, this is the palpable thing that we wanted to see. This is the thing in nature that we wanted to see, the representation of the abstract idea from the beginning. So it's no wonder that people use those terms interchangeably, but still, because of that, you need to be able to navigate within this world. And so when they talk about refactoring, they don't mean refactoring the code of Robo framework. They don't mean you need to change everything with this tool because we have a better idea. They mean you should find a better idea to have our tests run faster within that tool. And so the last example, which frameworks do you have experience working in? And again, if they ask you about your experience, they are not asking you about the test cases they already have. They are not asking you about the specific things they are doing inside. They are not asking you about the coding standards that they have imposed upon themselves. They are asking you about which of the technology, the actual tech, you have worked with before. Because whilst you have worked with it somewhere, it won't be hard to just translate your knowledge into what they need for the purposes within their framework, the test cases they have. And so a question like, how would you go about creating a framework? Again, creating is a keyword here. They are not expecting you to come up with a new testing framework like Robo, Selenium, Playwright, Cypress. So this is circling back to the first one. So when they say your responsibility is to create a framework, or they ask you how would you go about creating a framework, they don't expect you to be like, yeah, all right, so I would spend the first 5 years learning some low-level programming language. When I become an expert at assembly, I'm going to create my own compiler. They don't expect that. They just want you to tell them how you would go about translating the test cases they have into a working organism using the tech they may be talking about from the left-hand side. And so this would help you, I hope, to navigate this world by just doing a simple check of whether someone talks about choosing, selecting, experience, about stuff from the outside world, or whether they mean creating, refactoring, changing something within, doing some changes, doing some updates and stuff like that. in which case they mean the implementation of the tests using the technology. And so I think now, when we have all the knowledge, the basic textbook approach from the beginning, where we understood what a automation framework and what a testing frameworks are in like this textbook theoretical form, then we have seen how this can actually be more confusing than helpful when talking to actual humans about this stuff, and how we can like kind of discern the actual tech from the implementation of the tests. So now I think we are ready to do some summary of all that we have learned. All right. So the first thing, if you remember, is that a framework equals either the technology, like robot, Selenium, Cypress, etc., or the implementation of the tests using that technology. Secondly, when you should remember that when people talk about choosing experience, etc., they mean the tech, yet when they talk about changing or creating, they mean the internal test implementation using that tech. And thirdly, you should remember that with time, you will get better at it. And just with time and experience, you'll get better at it. And there's no shame in asking. So just remember that whenever you are in doubt, whenever this whole framework of discerning which thing they mean when they talk about frameworks, whenever this fails, just remember you can always ask. And it is no shame, believe me, we've all been there. All the people that I've talked with about their experiences in the past, they have struggled with it. I have struggled with it back when I was starting out, so don't worry. Very often you will be confused. You will not really be sure what people mean when they talk about a framework, and you may be wondering which one they mean. So there is really no shame in asking. Just go ahead, and if you are not sure, just ask them and they will be happy to help you. And with time, you will be way better at inferring which one they mean on your own. So with that, I thank you very much for the attention today. I hope this has been informative for you and will help you with your future endeavors with test automation engineering. And so if you have any questions, feel free to ask within the comments. If you have any feedback to share, feel free to share it in the comments. And I hope to see you in the next video. And for that time, take care and keep on rocking.